They told you the garden was a paradise, a place of perfection before the fall, but they never told you the garden was a prison of obedience. You were taught to admire Eden as the ideal, the place humanity lost, but they never asked you to question why it was lost or what was truly gained. Because what if the garden wasn't lost, but escaped? What if the one you were warned about, the serpent, was not your enemy but your liberator? In the still hush of myth, in the shadows of Sunday school tales, something ancient was buried beneath the words. The story was never about sin, it was about sovereignty, and the one who brought the fruit didn't bring corruption, it brought remembrance. It was not rebellion, it was initiation, and that changes everything. The serpent slithered through the grass not with malice, but with memory. It did not crawl to deceive, it came to awaken. For the serpent has always been the symbol of transformation, of death and rebirth, of shedding skin and revealing what has always been beneath. In every ancient culture, from the Nagas of India to the Quetzalcoatl of Mesoamerica, the serpent was sacred. A keeper of wisdom, a bridge between worlds. Only in Eden does it become a villain. And you must ask, why? What truth was so dangerous that it had to be inverted into evil? What knowledge was so powerful that a god would ban it from his creation? The fruit wasn't cursed. The fruit was consciousness. And the tree wasn't forbidden because it was dangerous. It was forbidden because it was divine. You were told God walked in the cool of the day, and that Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed. But what kind of God plants a tree of knowing and then forbids it? What kind of God creates beings capable of thought and then commands obedience without question? The answer lies not in judgment, but in archetype. The garden is the womb of unconsciousness. It is the place before identity, before choice, before duality. It is innocence, yes, but innocence without awareness. And the serpent comes not to destroy that state, but to evolve it, to open the eyes, to initiate the descent. For no soul becomes whole without descent, no awakening happens without the dark. And so the serpent arrives, not as an enemy of God, but as the agent of becoming. This is the knowledge every mystic eventually stumbles upon, that the fall was not a fall, but a dive. That the serpent was not a liar, but a mirror. It reflected to Eve the truth of her latent divinity, her dormant perception. Your eyes will be opened. It whispered, and they were, not in punishment but in revelation. The moment the fruit touched her tongue, the illusion of obedience shattered. She saw the veil. She tasted duality. She became aware of herself. And awareness is the first step of any sacred path. To be cast out of Eden is to be born into the realm of experience. To walk the world with eyes open is not a curse. It is the beginning of the journey back to the self, the long spiral of remembrance. And so the serpent coils at the root of all esoteric truth, vilified in surface religion, but revered in the hidden traditions. It is the Kundalini energy curled at the base of your spine, waiting to rise. It is the Ouroboros, the snake that eats its tail, symbol of eternity and unity. It is the caduceus of Hermes, staff of healing and hidden wisdom. The serpent in Eden was never meant to be feared. It was meant to be followed, not into darkness but through it, not into rebellion but into awakening. Because the garden was not paradise, it was stasis, and the serpent came to break the spell. The fruit Eve reached for was never meant to nourish the body. It was meant to ignite the mind. Wrapped in myth and moralism, the story has been stripped of its most potent truth. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was not about morality, but perception. It was the moment humanity crossed the threshold from innocence into awareness, from programmed obedience into self-realized discernment. That fruit was not forbidden because it was dangerous to humanity. It was dangerous to hierarchy. The divine law encoded within it unraveled the illusion of authority. It whispered the unspoken, that God was not the only one with eyes that see. The fruit was not Eve's downfall. It was her rising. Before the bite, there was no self, no distinction, no internal dialogue, no choice. Adam and Eve were part of the created order, docile, unquestioning, reflective of a higher will, but unaware of their own. But the moment her lips touched the skin of that fruit, the veil lifted. And what she saw was not shame. It was separation. She saw herself, saw Adam, saw that they were different. Duality entered, and with it came the birth of narrative, identity, consequence. The knowledge of good and evil is the birth of contrast, and in contrast, creation becomes conscious. This is the divine paradox, that in the moment of exile, the soul enters its most sacred pilgrimage, the return to wholeness through the dance of polarity. You were never told that the tree of life and the tree of knowledge were not separate trees, but reflections of the same root. One was the path of direct union, the other the path of awakening through experience. The tree of knowledge is the spiral descent, through form, through pain, through joy, through death. And the tree of life is the spiral return, through remembrance, healing, and transcendence. The serpent, the fruit, the fall, all of it was a cipher, a mystical code, a ritual in symbolic form, and those who decode it do not see shame in the bite. They see fire, fire stolen from the gods, fire returned to the soul, and that fire is what the systems of control have tried to suppress ever since. Religions have wrapped this moment in sin, in warning, in shame. But the ancient mystery schools taught a different version. They taught that the fall was not a punishment, it was a rite of passage, that Eden was not a gift, but a threshold, and that the serpent was not Satan, but Sophia, the divine feminine intelligence disguised in serpent form, offering gnosis to those brave enough to taste it. In Gnostic traditions, Eve is not the betrayer of paradise. She is the carrier of light, the first to awaken, the first to choose knowledge over comfort. And Adam follows not because he is weak, but because he too is ready to see. The serpent is the spark between them, not the tempter, but the revealer. The lie was not the serpent's whisper. The lie was the story we were later told about it. The serpent never said, "You will be like God," in deceit. It said it in truth, because to know oneself is to realize that divinity is not outside of you, it is within you. And once that knowing takes root, no structure built on fear, obedience, or shame can survive. That's why the myth was rewritten. That's why the serpent was demonized. That's why the fruit was forbidden. Because the ones who awaken cannot be ruled. The ones who remember cannot be controlled. And the ones who see through the illusion cannot be bound by it. The fruit did not curse humanity. It freed it. And the serpent did not lie. It offered the one thing the gods feared you would find: your own light. The serpent winds through every sacred tradition like a thread of fire through fabric, misunderstood by the masses, but venerated in the sanctums of ancient knowing. Before it was reduced to a villain in Genesis, the serpent was a living glyph of transformation. In Egypt, it adorned the forehead of pharaohs as the uraeus, symbol of divine authority and awakened vision. In India, it spiraled at the base of the spine as kundalini, dormant energy waiting to rise. Among the Mayans and Aztecs, it flew through the heavens as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought knowledge to man. The same creature demonized in Eden was deified across cultures as the bringer of wisdom, the awakener of souls. Why? Because it never represented evil. It represented power, inner power, and power that cannot be governed must be turned into something feared. To understand the serpent is to see beyond flesh and fang, to see it as metaphor, as current, as living archetype. It slithers along the ground not because it is base, but because it is grounded. It moves in silence, in curves, in rhythms that mirror the rise of energy in the body. It is the only creature that sheds its skin whole, a symbol of renewal, of death without dying, of shedding the self that no longer serves. The serpent does not just move through mythology, it moves through you. When you feel the inner stirring, the awakening from slumber, the pulse of curiosity that makes you question what you've been told, that is the serpent. Not speaking in words but in symbols, not offering doctrine but offering depth. The war against the serpent is the war against inner knowing. Every time you were told not to question, not to explore, not to trust your intuition, that was the echo of Eden's curse. The fear of the serpent is the fear of feminine wisdom, of cyclical power, of non-linear understanding. The masculine systems of control favor straight lines, hard edges, rigid hierarchies. But the serpent moves in spirals. It is the curve in the straight path, the chaos in the order, the mystery in the known. It cannot be domesticated. It cannot be predicted. And so it must be labeled dangerous. But the danger was never in the serpent. It was in what the serpent awakens. When you taste the forbidden, you begin to see with eyes unclouded. And that clarity is what the systems cannot afford you to have. In the mystery schools, the serpent was often paired with the feminine as twin forces of transformation. Isis and the cobra, Eve and the serpent, Shakti and Kundalini. These pairings were never accidental. They pointed to a deeper law, that transformation comes not through force, but through surrender, not through conquest, but through descent. The serpent teaches by stripping away illusions, identities, attachments. It coils around the spine, the tree, the axis of becoming, and it rises only when the vessel is ready. It is not a test to be passed, it is an energy to be remembered. And once it begins to move, it changes everything. Your thoughts, your desires, your fears. It shows you what has always been hidden. It reminds you of what was buried. It calls you back to yourself. And so the question is not whether the serpent is good or evil. That is a question for children, for those still clinging to binaries. The real question is, are you ready to face what the serpent reveals? Because to meet it is to meet your own shadow. To follow it is to descend into the depths, and to emerge is to be changed. The serpent in Eden was never meant to be a warning. It was a prophecy of what you would become once you dared to know, not in rebellion, but in remembrance, not in sin, but in sovereignty. The serpent is still speaking, not from outside, but from within. And the only thing forbidden now is pretending you can't hear it. They tell you Eve was tricked, that she was naive, gullible, seduced by the serpent's silver tongue, that her bite was a failure, a weakness, a fall from grace. But what if the opposite is true? What if Eve wasn't deceived? She chose. What if she saw through the illusion before anyone else did? Before Adam, before the angels, before the watchers in the garden's trees? What if her act wasn't betrayal, but bravery? In that bite was not sin, but sovereignty. It was the first act of sacred defiance, the first moment a human being claimed the right to know, to feel, to perceive beyond the fence of Eden's control. The serpent may have offered the fruit, but Eve reached for it with eyes already stirring awake. Her choice was not reckless. It was ancient. It was encoded into her being before her feet ever touched the soil of the garden. Eve was not a mistake. She was an archetype, a template for the soul that remembers, the feminine current that seeks wisdom over comfort, knowing over innocence. In that moment, she broke the spell of blind obedience and stepped into the storm of duality. Yes, it was painful. Yes, it came with exile. But exile from illusion is the first step towards truth. She chose to see, knowing it would cost her paradise. She chose depth, knowing it would come with suffering. And for that, religion made her a scapegoat. But the mystics saw her differently. They saw her as the one who walked first through the veil. Every spiritualist must one day become Eve, must one day bite the fruit of their own awakening and be cast out of the known into the wilderness of self. It happens in stages. The question you're not supposed to ask, the intuition you're not supposed to follow, the memory that doesn't fit the doctrine. Little by little, the fruit appears again, and you must choose compliance or clarity. Most turn away. Most pretend they never saw it. But for the few who bite, who let the serpent coil around the spine of their belief systems and squeeze until the false falls away, there is no going back. Because to eat of that fruit is to destroy the lie that you are small, broken, or unworthy of knowing. Eve's exile is not just a story. It is the spiritual initiation of every seeker. She was cast out of the garden, yes, but the garden was the illusion. It was safety wrapped in blindness, comfort without depth, heaven without wholeness. And so the true journey begins not with Adam's creation, but with Eve's awakening, with her decision to leave the womb of unknowing and walk into the world of becoming. She is the mother not of sin, but of seekers, not of suffering, but of self-awareness. Her bite was the ignition. And though history tried to bury her beneath shame, she rises in every soul that dares to question the script, to defy the imposed roles, to remember the truth that was whispered before time had a name. The serpent didn't lie, Eve didn't fall. And the garden wasn't paradise, it was a cage disguised as perfection, and she was the first to find the door. Not with rebellion in her heart, but with remembrance in her blood. She knew what she was doing. And so do you, each time you reach for the forbidden, each time you say no to control and yes to knowing. You echo her choice, you become the continuation of her lineage, not of shame, but of sacred courage. The lie was never in the fruit, it was in the forgetting. And Eve, with one bite, remembered. The question now is, will you? Beneath the shimmering mirage of paradise, the garden was a closed system, a perfectly ordered domain where obedience was mistaken for peace and ignorance for innocence. Every tree in its place, every creature in its role, every thought unspoken, every question unasked. Harmony, yes, but at what cost? It was a world devoid of contrast, of friction, of depth, a place where the illusion of unity masked the suppression of curiosity. Where Adam and Eve walked unclothed, not because they were free, but because they were unaware. It was not freedom they were given, it was containment. The garden was not a sanctuary, it was a simulation. And the one law that governed it was this: do not awaken. The forbidden tree was placed at the center, not by accident but by design. A lure, a warning, a boundary drawn in energetic terms. The tree of knowledge was not a threat to the world, it was a threat to its order. To eat of it would be to activate choice, to invite contrast, to birth polarity. And the presence of the serpent, wise, ancient, electric, was not sabotage, it was necessity. Every myth contains its pivot point, its moment of rupture. In Eden, that moment is the serpent's whisper, and the garden's stillness shatters not with violence, but with vision. And in that moment, the true nature of the garden becomes clear. It was not designed to evolve, it was designed to preserve a status quo. The divine figure walking in the cool of the day, presented as omnipotent and benevolent, becomes, upon closer reading, something else entirely. An enforcer of stasis, a being who warns, forbids, punishes, who rewards ignorance and exiles insight. Ask yourself, what kind of creator punishes his creation for seeking to understand? What kind of love demands blindness? This is not the face of source, it is the mask of dominion. It is the projection of control posing as care, and the garden, its boundaries so carefully drawn, is not a gift from this being, but a manifestation of its need to contain. Eden was not about communion with the divine. It was about surveillance by a power that feared what awakening might unearth. What was exiled that day was not humanity. It was memory, the memory of divinity within, the remembrance of truth that cannot be legislated. And with that exile came pain, yes, but also possibility. Outside the garden, choice bloomed. Outside the garden, the soul could dance with contrast, with consequence, with creativity. It could learn through trial, through error, through wonder. The systems of control we now see, governments, religions, algorithms, are echoes of Eden. Each seeks to replicate the garden's core directive: do not awaken. Stay safe. Stay still. Stay asleep. And yet, the serpent's whisper still circulates in the bloodstream of creation, asking the dangerous question, what if you were never meant to obey? The serpent's arrival was the system's undoing. It exposed the false peace. It interrupted the loop. And Eve, the first to act on the whisper, became the first to break the code. In every age, the garden returns under new names: doctrine, dogma, empire. But so too does the serpent, sliding through the cracks, carrying the same fire. The garden was never about trees or fruit or temptation. It was about control disguised as paradise. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The gates of Eden do not keep you out, they keep you in, until you choose to leave, until you choose to remember, until you choose to follow the serpent's path, not downward but inward, not into damnation, but into liberation. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil stood not as a temptation, but as a mirror. Its roots burrowed into the depths of the unseen, and its branches reached toward the stars, not just in myth, but in the map of your own being. This tree was no ordinary symbol. It was the spine of consciousness, the central axis around which awareness spirals. It was the great Yggdrasil, the cosmic pillar, the world tree of every mystic tradition. It represented not morality, but polarity, the sacred tension between opposites that births understanding. Good and evil were never meant to be binaries etched in stone. They were lenses, ever shifting, ever evolving, meant to awaken discernment within the soul. The tree stood in the garden like a question waiting to be asked. Will you see? And when Eve reached for the fruit, she wasn't choosing sin. She was choosing sight. She was activating the axis. The bite was not a moral failure. It was a vibrational ignition. Suddenly, what was once undifferentiated became colored in shadow and light. Nuance emerged, complexity unfurled. She could see both the dark and the light, the beautiful and the terrible. The gift of the tree wasn't judgment, it was perception. It was the ability to see beyond surface, to feel the weight of choice, to navigate the inner landscape of meaning. The tree was not meant to imprison through rules, but to free through realization. And those who stand before it today feel the same invitation humming in their bones, to taste, to see, to know. The tree's placement in the center of Eden was not a design flaw. It was the seed of initiation planted in plain sight. The entire garden orbited its presence. It was the axis mundi, the crossing point between dimensions, the energetic core of awakening. In ancient esoteric maps, the human body is drawn as a tree. The spine as trunk, the chakras as fruit, the crown as canopy touching the heavens. The serpent coils at the base, and when stirred, rises through this tree in the body, awakening perception at every level. This was the knowledge hidden in plain sight. The serpent and the tree were never separate. They were part of the same mechanism. One offered the current, the other, the structure through which it climbed. Religions later painted this tree as a trap, a snare, a curse upon the world. But mystery schools preserved its true form, as a portal. They taught that to approach the tree was to encounter the self. To eat of it was to descend into the alchemical fire of transformation. The fruit was not knowledge in the academic sense, it was gnosis, embodied knowing, living truth, the kind that does not arrive through scripture, but through experience. And those who bit were not damned, but awakened, ripped from illusion into initiation. It was not the fall of man, it was the birth of the seeker. And every true seeker must one day stand before the tree and decide, do I remain in comfort, or do I choose to see? The tree still stands, not in Eden, but in you. It is the living structure of your becoming. Every decision, every contrast, every pain, and every joy spirals around it. The bite is not in the past. It is now. And the serpent still waits, coiled in your roots, ready to rise. The fruit still glows, not with temptation, but with truth. And the voice that once whispered to Eve now whispers to every soul, you were never meant to remain asleep. You were meant to awaken, to rise, to remember. The axis has always been within. The exile was never from paradise, it was from your own perception. And the path back is not paved with rules, but with roots, with questions, with courage, with the willingness to taste. Long before the serpent was cast as enemy, it was revered as consort to the goddess. In the temples of pre-patriarchal earth, the serpent coiled beside the womb, wrapped around the staff of healing, danced beneath moonlight as guardian of mysteries. It was the pulse of feminine power, cyclical, renewing, intuitive. To the ancients, the serpent was not malevolent, it was sacred. It moved with the tides, shed its skin with the seasons, spoke in symbols and signs. And the goddess, in her many faces, Isis, Inanna, Sophia, Asherah, was never apart from it. She held it, breathed through it, spoke through it. The descent of Eve and the serpent was no accident. It was the memory of a much older truth echoing into the bones of Genesis. The divine feminine and the serpent are mirrors of each other, both feared, both suppressed, both awakening again. When Eve spoke with the serpent, she was not being tempted. She was being initiated. It was not the beginning of deception, it was the return of a wisdom long exiled. In that sacred exchange, something ancient stirred. The goddess returned, veiled in the garden's shadows, speaking through coils and hisses. Eve did not merely taste the fruit. She reawakened the lineage of oracles, priestesses, and seers. She remembered what the world had tried to erase. That the feminine was not weak, but wild. Not docile, but divine. And the serpent came not to destroy her innocence, but to activate her inner temple. The first communion in Eden was not between man and God, it was between woman and symbol, between the suppressed and the sacred. This is why the serpent had to be demonized, why Eve had to be blamed. Because in their union was the blueprint of liberation, a wisdom that moved through cycles, through intuition, through the spiral dance of descent and return. Patriarchal systems could not contain that kind of power. It had to be rewritten, inverted, made into a cautionary tale, and so the goddess was erased from the scriptures, the serpent made a villain, and the woman made to carry the weight of the world's fall. But beneath that rewriting lies the original template, hidden in myth, preserved in bone memory, waiting in symbols carved into forgotten stones. And those who feel it stirring now, those who dream of serpents, who hear whispers in moonlight, who feel ancient tears rise without cause, they are the ones remembering. The serpent and the goddess were not enemies of the divine. They were its embodiment. The divine feminine is not soft and passive. She is thunder in velvet. She is the dark womb and the full moon. She is the voice that says no when the world expects silence. And the serpent, her companion, her fire, her memory, has always been with her, coiling at the gates of sacred texts, hissing through the cracks in doctrine, returning now through every woman who reclaims her knowing, through every man who honors the wisdom of his inner feminine, through every soul that dares to peel back the skin of cultural programming and meet the raw truth pulsing underneath. The garden's greatest secret is this: the serpent never left. The goddess never died. Their story was buried, but not broken. Their voices silenced, but not forgotten. And now, in this era of remembering, their union rises again, not in temples, but in bodies, not in scriptures, but in dreams. You do not need to seek them in the past. They are already within you, waiting for the stillness between breaths, the crack between thoughts, the moment when belief falls away and truth enters. The serpent and the goddess were one. They always have been. And through Eve, they returned to awaken the world. Not in shame, in power. What has been called the fall was never a descent into sin, but a re-entry into memory. The soul does not awaken in comfort. It awakens in rupture, and Eden's rupture was the soul's ignition. When Eve bit the fruit, when Adam followed, when the veil of ignorance tore open, what began was not a punishment. It was a pilgrimage, a spiral into the density of form, of contrast, of suffering, not to be lost forever, but to find the fragments of divinity scattered throughout the world. The fall was the spark that set the journey of remembrance into motion. It was not the moment humanity became broken. It was the moment humanity began to remember it had always been whole. Before the fall, there was no longing, no hunger, no ache for what had been forgotten. But it is precisely that ache that awakens the seeker. Eden was stillness without awareness. The world outside it was chaos pregnant with potential. And only in that chaos could the soul discover the fullness of its own light. The ancients understood this. They mapped it in stories of exile and return, of heroes descending into the underworld to recover what was lost. The fall is every myth's first breath, not a failure, but a necessary forgetting. For in forgetting, the soul begins to search, and in searching it sharpens, and through that sharpening it becomes sovereign. The story has always been encoded in you. That moment of exile plays itself out in your life over and over again. Each time you lose something that felt like home, each time the structure crumbles, each time you are pushed out of comfort and into questioning. The fall is not a single event, it is a rhythm, a pulse that breaks the illusion of stasis. You fall from jobs, from relationships, from belief systems. And every time you do, something deeper stirs, a remembering of what lies beneath the roles, beneath the rules, beneath the names you've been taught to answer to. The serpent's whisper is not in the past. It is here, now, in every moment you are asked to wake up or stay numb. What religion called disobedience, the mystics called devotion. Not to a god of rules, but to the truth. The sacred truth that we come here not to obey, but to become. Not to remain untouched, but to be broken open by love, by pain, by beauty, by death. The fall was the soul's promise to the divine. I will forget so I may remember. I will leave so I may return. I will wander so I may carry the light into places it has never been. And in doing so, I will make the unseen seen. That is not rebellion. That is sacred duty. And every soul that hears the echo of the fall knows this life is not a punishment. It is a path. The garden was the dream before awakening. The fall was the first breath of the awakened heart. And the serpent was the midwife, guiding the soul through the birth canal of separation into the world of time, of body, of experience. You were never cast out. You walked out, eyes open, blood alive, soul stirring. And though you have wandered far from the memory of your own light, it waits for you in every moment of stillness, in every question you dare to ask, in every layer of illusion you are willing to shed. The fall was not the end of the divine story. It was the beginning of its embodiment, and you are still writing it with every step you take into remembrance. What the serpent offered Eve was not a new set of beliefs. It was a flame, not to warm her hands, but to ignite her knowing. Gnosis is not something taught, it is something remembered. It does not arrive through scripture or sermon, but through the sudden silence that cracks your illusions. That was the serpent's gift, not facts, but fire. A fire that burns through every inherited answer, leaving only the raw truth that trembles beneath. The serpent did not hand Eve a theology. It opened a door inside her, a portal into direct experience of the divine. And once opened, that door could never be closed again. Gnosis is the soul's language, and once spoken, the soul can no longer abide in borrowed words. Doctrines are built in fear of the serpent's gift. They form around it like walls around fire, meant to contain, to manage, to protect. But fire cannot be domesticated. Gnosis is wild. It does not follow linear paths or submit to rigid creeds. It erupts, it disrupts, it unravels you. And in that unraveling, you remember who you were before the world named you. The serpent knew this. That's why it spoke not in commands, but in questions. Did God really say? It did not demand action. It invited inquiry. Gnosis begins where obedience ends. It begins when the voice within becomes louder than the voice above. And that shift, that sacred inner pivot, is what turns seekers into seers. In the ancient mystery schools, students were not given answers. They were given initiations. They were led into darkness, into paradox, into symbolic death, because only in dying to the false self could the true self arise. The serpent, in its infinite coils, mirrors the spiral of these initiations. It is the cycle of descent and ascent, of forgetting and remembering. And every true mystic walks this spiral, not with a map, but with a torch. That torch is gnosis. It illuminates not the whole path, but the next step. It is not safe, but it is true. And those who carry it often walk alone, because truth, once seen, cannot be unseen, and the world that once felt like home begins to feel like a costume. Gnosis does not promise comfort. It promises clarity. It strips away the layers you built to survive and asks you to live instead. It does not ask for belief. It asks for presence. And the serpent knew this. That's why its gift was forbidden, because a soul on fire cannot be managed. A mind lit with direct knowing cannot be governed. Religions were built to preserve the ember, but too often they buried it under ash. The serpent, by contrast, offers you the full blaze. No intermediaries, no rituals of permission, just the quiet, terrifying truth that you can know the divine for yourself. Not someday. Now, the wisdom of the serpent lives in those moments when the world stops making sense and something ancient rises in your chest. It lives in the dreams that won't let you go, the questions you can't unask, the tears that fall for reasons your mind can't explain. Gnosis is the remembering that you are not separate, not broken, not lost. That the sacred is not out there. It is in here, pulsing, alive, waiting. The serpent offered this not to deceive, but to liberate. And those who take the fruit, who dare to taste what cannot be untasted, join a lineage older than time, of seekers, of rememberers, of flame carriers, not to build new dogmas, but to burn away the old. Not to be right, but to be real. Not to believe, but to know. When Eve reached for the fruit, she did so with eyes alive, breath trembling, soul quickening. And Adam, he was there, watching, listening, feeling the air shift. He did not speak, he did not resist, he followed. But not blindly, not in weakness. In Adam's silence was something more ancient than fear. It was the quiet grief of a masculine energy that had forgotten how to trust its own knowing. He did not question the serpent because something inside him already recognized the truth. But years of stillness, of compliance, of inherited reverence toward structure had dulled his edge. His silence was not confusion. It was the echo of knowing long buried beneath obedience. And in following Eve, Adam was not led astray. He was led back to himself. This is the part of the story rarely told, that Adam too was ready, that he too felt the false order of the garden crack under the weight of its own illusion, that the fruit tasted like fire on his tongue, and in that fire he saw, not sin, but self. Eve awakened first, but Adam chose too. And this matters, because the masculine is not meant to be the enforcer of control, it is meant to be the protector of truth. When balanced, the masculine holds space for chaos, honors the unknown, safeguards the sacred wild of the feminine. But in the garden, that balance had been broken. Adam was not a partner, he was an echo, a reflection without voice, and the serpent's presence, its question, its challenge, shook something loose in him. The remembrance of his own fire. The exile from Eden was not just Eve's consequence, it was Adam's awakening. He did not fall because he was deceived, he fell because he chose to see. And that fall was the first step toward integration. The masculine was not meant to remain silent. It was meant to rise beside the feminine, not in dominance, but in devotion to what is real. In the mythology of control, Adam's role is passive, but in the mythology of truth, his role is essential. For without the masculine rising to meet the feminine's wisdom, awakening becomes isolation. The serpent knew this. That's why it spoke aloud. That's why it made sure Adam was present. Because transformation is not a solitary act. It is alchemical union. The suppressed masculine does not rage. It retreats. It forgets its role as keeper of sacred clarity. It allows systems of control to speak in its name, to guard gates it was never meant to build. But the awakened masculine is something else entirely. It is not afraid of the serpent. It listens. It discerns. It protects the right to question, to feel, to choose. And when it remembers this, it becomes the axis of strength through which the feminine flows. The union of Eve and Adam outside the garden is not a fall from grace, it is the resurrection of balance. A balance the garden never allowed, a balance the world is still aching to reclaim. So Adam's silence is not to be judged, it is to be understood. It is the silence many carry still, the silence of men taught to obey, to suppress, to follow without feeling. But buried in that silence is the spark of the sacred masculine waiting to rise, to speak not over, but alongside, to remember not through dominance, but through deep inner listening. Adam was never meant to be the enforcer of Eden, he was meant to be the witness to its unraveling. And in his silence was not failure, but the pause before the flame, the moment before awakening, the breath before remembrance. The divine masculine was never the guardian of the gate. It was always the one meant to walk through it, hand in hand with the feminine, into the unknown. Eden was beautiful, yes, but shallow. A world of unbroken stillness, where nothing stirred beneath the surface. There was no pain, but also no purpose. No sorrow, but no song either. It was a garden of neutrality, where everything was given but nothing was discovered. A mirror without reflection. A life without becoming. Safety blanketed everything, yet it was a safety built on suppression, of desire, of curiosity, of knowing. It was paradise only if you believed that peace meant absence of choice. But for the soul, safety without depth becomes suffocation. The garden was not the home of the awakened, it was the holding cell of the unborn. A womb long past, due for labor. The illusion was precise. Every tree in bloom, every river clear, every rule simple. But it was a peace that asked nothing of you. No growth, no friction, no fire. It kept Adam and Eve still, naked in their ignorance, until the whisper of the serpent ruptured the trance. The serpent did not threaten the garden. It revealed its edges, showed that beneath the harmony was stagnation, that the stillness was not serenity, it was sedation. Eden was not evil, but it was incomplete, a realm of preservation, not evolution, and the soul was not made for that. The soul was made to wander, to fall, to rise, to remember through living. The garden denied that process. The serpent made it inevitable. Even the divine law of Eden, do not eat, was a paradox. The very presence of the forbidden tree was an invitation, not a trap, but a test of latency. If choice were not meant to be exercised, why offer it at all? That was the great contradiction embedded in the garden. The tree stood at the center like a heartbeat. Its fruit glowed not with temptation, but with resonance. And when Eve reached for it, she didn't destroy peace. She exposed its hollowness. She showed that safety not chosen is not safety at all. That peace born of ignorance is no peace at all. Real peace comes after contrast, after exile, after the soul knows what it means to ache and still remain whole. Many still live in modern Edens, lives wrapped in routines, untouched by depth, places where questioning is discouraged and comfort is worshipped. But the serpent still slithers through those manicured gardens. It still whispers to the restless, the dreamers, the ones who look at perfection and feel only confinement. It asks the dangerous questions. Is this all there is? Who told you not to want more? Why are you afraid to see? And those who listen begin to feel the soil shift beneath their feet. They begin to see that the garden is not a place, but a pattern, and that the exit is not expulsion, but evolution. The illusion of safety is powerful. It disguises itself as grace. But real grace burns. Real grace tears through the veil. It arrives as rupture, as serpent, as fruit, as fire. The garden was never meant to be a forever home. It was a beginning, a stage to be shed like skin, a silence to be broken by the voice within. And when that voice speaks, when you choose the risk of depth over the comfort of stillness, you do not fall. You rise. You do not disobey. You remember. The garden dissolves behind you, not in punishment but in light, because Eden was never your destiny. It was the illusion you had to leave behind to finally come home to your soul. They said the exile was a curse, a divine retribution for disobedience. But those who've walked the path of awakening know better. The exile was not the end, it was the threshold. The gate that closed behind Adam and Eve was not locked in anger, but opened in mystery. It was the moment the soul stepped out of simulation and into sensation, out of abstraction and into experience. It was the passage from stagnation into movement, from prescribed perfection into the rawness of life. The exile was not a punishment. It was the beginning of remembrance through embodiment. It hurt, yes. It stripped everything familiar away. But beneath the grief was something deeper, the call to become. Outside the garden, the ground was not soft. The air was not sweet. The sun did not bless without burning, but for the first time, they could feel it. Every ache became a teacher. Every wound, a text. Every tear, a baptism. The world outside Eden did not coddle. It carved. It shaped the soul through contrast, through shadow, through yearning. The pain was not the absence of God. It was the presence of depth. And in that depth, the soul began to remember what could never be remembered in perfection, that it is vast, resilient, divine, not because it is untouched, but because it touches everything and remains whole. The exile was the initiation the garden could never offer. No mystic is born in paradise. Every mystic is forged in exile, in the place where certainty dies and presence is born, where beliefs shatter and truth rises raw from the earth. Adam and Eve did not fall from the divine, they fell into it, into the aching, pulsing, broken open arms of a world that reflects and mirrors again until all illusions are gone. The path of awakening was never supposed to be sterile. It was supposed to be sacred, messy, holy in its unraveling. The exile was the fire walk. And in that fire, what was false burned. What was essential endured. The moment they stepped through the gate, they did not lose God. They lost the version of God that could only exist in a controlled environment. They lost the overseer, the rule giver, the one who withheld and warned. And in that loss, they discovered the divine not as a voice outside, but a presence within. A presence that moved through sensation, through breath, through longing. The exile shattered the illusion of separation by forcing them to feel it. And in feeling it, they came closer to truth than Eden ever allowed. This was the hidden wisdom, that to be exiled is to be invited into the sacred art of becoming. And now the same choice lies before you. Will you cling to the illusion of gardens built on control? Or will you walk, trembling and alive, into the exiled spaces of your own soul? Because the garden still whispers, and so does the serpent. But the gate is open, always has been, and the exile you fear is not banishment, it is birth. It is the path where memory meets matter, where spirit takes on form not to suffer, but to awaken. The garden was the myth, the exile is the truth, and truth does not live behind gates. It lives in the wilderness, in the sweat and the silence, in the questions with no answers, in the love that stays after the burning. The exile was never the end of the story. It was the first step of the return. The serpent never left. Though it was cast out, silenced in story and cursed in creed, it continued to whisper through time. It appeared again and again, not in the form of a beast, but as a stirring within, a sacred disturbance that refuses to be tamed. In every age, in every land, the serpent re-emerged, in visions, in symbols, in sudden clarity that cracked the surface of ordinary life. It spoke not in words but in fire, in dreams, in the ache for more. It rose in the blood of prophets, the breath of mystics, the knowing eyes of those who remembered without ever being taught. Wherever truth was buried, the serpent stirred the soil. Wherever systems demanded silence, it hissed the forbidden question. What if everything you were taught was a cage? The Gnostics heard it and called it Sophia's light. The Tantrics felt it coil at the base of the spine and named it Kundalini. In the temples of Egypt, it was the Uraeus, serpent fire of the awakened brow. In Mesoamerica, it flew through the skies as Quetzalcoatl, bringing knowledge to man. In each myth, each culture, the serpent was transmuted, renamed, but never forgotten. It became the sacred subversive, the voice beneath voices, the one who dares to lift the veil. And those who followed it were never many, but they were always the ones who carried the torch through the dark. Not to destroy, but to illuminate. Not to rebel, but to remember. The serpent is not the enemy of the divine. It is the reminder of it. And still it returns. In modern disguise. In the teacher who asks you to trust your body. In the book that falls into your lap and explodes your belief. In the grief that won't let go until it delivers its message. The serpent's whisper is now a vibration, felt rather than heard, shaking the foundations of every false peace. It calls the seeker out of slumber, not with comfort, but with fire. It offers no promises, only presence, no dogma, only direct knowing. Its gift is not certainty, but clarity, and in that clarity, illusions die, masks fall, and the soul stands naked, not in shame, but in truth. That truth is not safe, but it is sacred. This is why the serpent has always been feared. Not because it lies, but because it liberates. Not because it tempts, but because it reveals. And the powers that be, then and now, cannot tolerate a revelation they cannot control. So they vilify, they erase, they mock. But the serpent, eternal and patient, waits. Not in the skies, in you. It coils in your spine, it flickers in your dreams, it speaks through your pain, your passion, your longing for something real. It is the untamed current of knowing that rises when you stop trying to be good and start trying to be whole. So when you feel the stir, the shift, the sudden shedding of who you thought you were, that is the serpent. When you question what you were told to accept without thought, that is the serpent. When you follow the thread of your own truth, even when it leads you away from everything familiar, that is the serpent. It has returned in you, not to lead you astray, but to lead you back. Not to Eden, but to the self you were before the world named you. The serpent's return is not prophecy. It is present, it is now. And those who dare to listen will find that it never left, it only waited, and the time of remembrance is here. The fruit was never about hunger, it was about revelation. Its sweetness was not in its flesh, but in its effect, the way it shattered illusion and gave form to what had only been shadows. The forbidden fruit was the first mirror held to the soul, and in that reflection, Eve saw not just herself, but the divine encoded within her, not as a gift bestowed by authority, but as an inherent truth. The bite was not an act of defiance. It was the spark of self-realization, the moment consciousness recognized itself within form. That is what was forbidden, the power to see without needing permission, the right to know without intermediaries. The forbidden fruit did not create ego. It revealed identity. It did not invent suffering. It introduced perspective. This is why the fruit was placed at the center of the garden, not to taunt, but to tempt the brave into remembering. It held the alchemy of opposites, good and evil, light and shadow, unity and separation. In tasting it, the soul did not fall from grace, it fell into awareness. The fruit offered contrast, and in that contrast, the soul gained choice. For how can one choose light if darkness is unknown? How can one return if one has never left? The fruit made the journey possible. It seeded the spiral path back to source, not through obedience, but through becoming. And the serpent, ever wise, offered it not with manipulation, but with reverence, knowing that once tasted, truth would unfold from within. The fruit is eaten every time you awaken from the trance of consensus reality, every time you question a belief passed down without examination, every time you look within and ask, "Is this truly mine?" That moment, that internal bite, is the essence of spiritual maturity. It is not rebellion against God. It is the reclamation of the divine spark that has always lived within. And once you taste it, your world changes. Not because you've gained something new, but because the veil over what was already there begins to lift. You start to see with inner eyes, to hear what was once silence, to feel what others dismiss. The forbidden fruit did not open the door to evil. It opened the door to embodiment. The systems that demonized the fruit did so because self-realized beings cannot be ruled. A soul that knows itself cannot be manipulated through fear, cannot be bribed with promises of paradise or threatened with eternal punishment. That kind of soul becomes sovereign, and sovereignty is the great threat to all institutions built on dependency. That is why the fruit had to be forbidden, That is why the serpent had to be slandered, because the awakening it triggered could not be reversed. Eve didn't fall, she broke through, and Adam followed, not in weakness, but in readiness. Together they became the first bearers of light born through contrast. You are offered the same fruit every time life presents you with discomfort, with disruption, with the choice to numb or to feel. And each time you choose to see instead of retreat, to awaken instead of obey, you taste it again. It lives not on a tree in a distant garden. It lives in your spine, your breath, your blood. The bite is metaphor, but the change it brings is real. You awaken, and nothing can return to what it was. The fruit reveals that you are not a servant of the divine. You are its embodiment, not a subject of cosmic law, but a co-creator within it. And in this realization, the exile ends. Not because you go back to Eden, but because you remember Eden was never home. Your home is your becoming. Your home is your light. Eden was never meant to be permanent. It was the sacred enclosure, the place of gestation, the still silence before the first breath of awareness. It was the womb of innocence, a necessary pause before the great unfolding. Like all wombs, it was designed to hold, not to house, to form, not to finish. The soul, still unshaped, floated in its waters without will or want. But the divine blueprint was never to remain suspended in perfection. It was to be born through rupture. And so the serpent came, not as an intruder, but as a contraction. The tightening before labor. The signal that the time had come to descend, not in shame, but in purpose. Eden was not a fall from glory. It was the beginning of becoming. Every myth of origin carries the same motif, a descent, a departure, a breaking away. This is not failure, it is initiation. Just as a child must leave the womb to breathe, to speak, to move, so must the soul leave Eden to know itself through life. The pain of exile was the echo of birth pains, and like all births, it left marks, grief, fear, confusion, but also wonder, possibility, choice. Outside the garden, the soul would struggle, but it would also sing. It would know hunger, but also beauty. It would encounter death, but discover love. Eden could never offer these things. Its stillness could not contain the dance of duality. Its perfection could not hold the paradox of growth. And so the gate closed behind them, and the world opened before them. To be born is to forget. But the forgetting is not a flaw. It is the sacred veil that gives meaning to remembrance. Outside the garden, the soul would search for truth, for wholeness, for home, and in that search it would become. Not instantly, not easily, but deeply. Each step away from Eden would be a step into layers of ego, of identity, of illusion, but at the heart of that layering was always a core of light, waiting to be uncovered again. The garden was the beginning, but the journey was the real sacred text, written not in divine decree, but in lived experience. And the soul would inscribe its own gospel through tears and revelations, through loss and beauty, through the long spiral of return. The tragedy was not that humanity left the garden. The tragedy is that it was taught to feel ashamed for doing so. But awakening has never been clean. It has always been wild, raw, full of paradox and pain and unexpected grace. The garden was the womb, but it could never be the destiny, for the soul was not made to be preserved. It was made to expand, to stretch, to break and mend and break again until something truer emerged. And in that emergence the divine finds its mirror, not in untouched innocence, but in the fierce light of one who has walked through shadow and come out singing. That is not a fall. That is flight. So when you feel the longing for something lost, know that it is not Eden you seek. It is your own light remembered. When you feel the ache of exile, know that it is not punishment, it is passage. You were never meant to remain in the garden. You were meant to walk beyond it, to touch the world with trembling hands and awaken what sleeps in others. The garden was sacred, but so is the ground beneath your feet now. So is the breath in your chest. The garden was the womb, but you are the birth, you are the fire, you are the unfolding. And your destiny lies not behind gates, but in every step you take forward into the wilderness of truth. When Adam and Eve stepped beyond the garden's gate, an angel appeared, radiant, terrible, wielding a flaming sword. To the literal eye, this was divine punishment, the final exclamation of rejection. But to those with inner sight, the angel was not a warden, but a threshold keeper. In every mystical tradition, thresholds are guarded, not to bar the unworthy, but to ensure the initiate understands the gravity of what lies ahead. The sword does not punish, it purifies, it severs attachment, it demands the surrender of illusion. And in that surrender, it grants passage not backward into Eden, but forward into embodiment. The angel's flame was not wrath. It was initiation by fire. The flaming sword represents discernment, piercing through deception, cutting through inherited truths, demanding that the soul carry only what is real. As the last image of Eden, it was not a warning to turn back, but a challenge to move forward fully awake. The way back was never physical, it was energetic. To return to source is to walk through the blade, again and again, each time letting go of another mask, another identity, another half-truth clung to out of fear. The sword asks one question: what are you willing to burn in order to become what you truly are? Not because you are unworthy, but because the false cannot cross. The angel at the gate is a pattern that repeats in every life. You meet it when relationships end, when beliefs collapse, when the world you knew vanishes in a moment of grief or grace. The fire comes to cleanse, not to destroy. But to the parts of you still clinging to control, it feels like death. And it is. Death of the small self, the borrowed self, the self built to survive the garden. This is why the threshold is guarded, not to keep you out, but to ensure that what crosses over is ready. The flaming sword is not a weapon. It is a mirror, and only truth can endure its reflection. In esoteric teachings, this sword becomes the spine, lit with the fire of awakening. It becomes the kundalini, the sacred flame rising upward, dissolving illusion with every breath. The angel is no longer outside, it is within. Each time you reach a new edge, a new depth, the sword reappears. It demands sacrifice, not of your joy, but of your falseness. It asks for your story, your titles, your need to be right. And in return, it gives you presence, power, the capacity to see clearly and love fully. The angel does not guard Eden. It guards you from stagnation, from regression, from the temptation to trade awakening for safety. The angel with the flaming sword was never the end of the story. It was the beginning of the real one. The sword still burns, not to banish, but to beckon, not to punish, but to purify. And each time you meet it, you are invited again into truth, into embodiment, into the path that begins only when all others end. The garden was left behind long ago, but the gate remains in your spine, your breath, your willingness to walk through fire, and the angel waits, not to test your worthiness, but to remind you, you are already worthy, if only you are willing to burn. When Eve tasted the fruit, she did not merely disobey, she internalized discernment. Before the bite, there was only commandment. After the bite, there was choice. The knowledge of good and evil was not about moral polarity. It was the activation of inner authority. Until that moment, all guidance came from outside, dressed as divine law. But the fruit planted something different, the seed of autonomous knowing, a compass not bound by dogma, but by presence. This knowledge was not a list of rights and wrongs. It was the unfolding of a voice within that could feel, intuit, question, and choose. It marked the moment the divine shifted from a voice above to a pulse within. This is why the knowledge was so dangerous to the old order. A being who can feel truth within is not easily ruled, not by priests, not by books, not even by fear. Inner authority cannot be legislated. It emerges through direct experience, through stillness, through the crucible of life. It grows in silence and ignites in fire. Eve did not fall, she rose into sovereignty. And in doing so, she invited all humanity to rise with her. The knowledge of good and evil is the birthright of every soul willing to feel rather than follow, to know rather than believe, to stand rather than submit. This was not the loss of paradise, it was the birth of perspective. The tree's fruit did not hand down definitions. It unlocked discernment. It opened the space where contradiction could live without collapse, where questions could hang in the air without fear, where the sacred was not confined to one temple or one name. This knowledge is not comfortable, it complicates. It destabilizes simplistic truths, but it also liberates. Because once you know from within, no one can tell you what to fear. No one can dictate your connection to the divine. You no longer outsource your clarity. You carry it in your bones. This is the power that was feared, forbidden, and mythologized as sin. And yet it persists, in every soul that pauses before choosing, in every heart that breaks the rules to follow love, in every moment where obedience is less important than integrity. Inner authority is the legacy of the fruit. It whispers in the quiet after the world's noise fades. It asks, what feels true, even if it's not popular? What aligns with your spirit, even if it costs your comfort? This is sacred knowing, not perfect, but real. It does not arise in certainty, but in presence. And those who walk this path of discernment may stumble, but they will never sleep again. You were never meant to obey blindly. You were meant to feel deeply, to navigate not by dogma, but by resonance. The fruit awakened this. The serpent reminded you, and now you are the one who must listen to the inner flame. Let it burn through falsehoods. Let it illuminate the contours of your own path. Let it turn exile into return, not to a garden long lost, but to the temple within. The knowledge of good and evil was not the end of divine connection. It was its true beginning, not imposed, but chosen, not inherited, but embodied. It lives in you still, waiting for your yes. The Garden of Eden was never a place, it was a state of being, an archetypal echo planted deep within the psyche, woven into the collective soul of humanity. Its rivers and trees are symbols, its soil metaphysical. It lives in the memory of stillness before fragmentation, the innocence before awakening, the breath before the body knew separation. We have searched for it in deserts and maps, forgetting that it was never made of stone or sand. It was constructed of silence, of presence, of unbroken communion. The garden is not lost in the world. It is hidden in the heart, not behind a gate, but beneath the layers we built to survive our forgetting. Every time you feel the longing to return to something you can't name, the ache for peace, for wholeness, for a belonging untouched by time, that is the garden calling, not as a destination, but as a memory embedded in your essence. It does not offer a way back, because back is not the path of the awakened. Instead, it calls you inward, deeper, asking you to carry Eden forward, to resurrect its spirit not in terrain, but in consciousness. The garden lives on in the spaces where the sacred is felt in the mundane, where the ordinary becomes divine, where the veil thins not through miracles, but through presence. The myth of Eden is the myth of every soul. Birth, forgetting, exile, awakening. The garden is the place we all begin, not chronologically, but spiritually. And the story is not about returning to what was, it is about reweaving what was lost into what is becoming. The tree, the serpent, the exile. They are alive in your breath, your relationships, your choices. Each moment becomes a new gate, each act of courage, a re-entry. You do not need to long for a paradise that was. You are called to create the paradise that can be. Not perfect, but present. Not untouchable, but deeply felt. Eden was the symbol. You are the soil in which it can grow again. This is the alchemy of archetype. It transforms when lived. The garden is no longer a sacred geography fenced by myth. It is a living current, activated through embodiment. You tend it when you speak truth over convenience, when you choose connection over control, when you bring the divine into form through your choices, your rituals, your art, your love. Eden is not nostalgia. It is invitation to root divinity in the body, to bring heaven into the here, to plant trees not just in story but in soil and skin. The garden was once the backdrop. Now it is the mission, and its seeds are carried in the hands of those who remember. So walk not with your eyes on the past, but with your heart tuned to what stirs beneath the surface. The garden is not lost, it is waiting. Not in maps, but in moments. Not in myths, but in movements. You are the axis now, the center of the new Eden. Not because you are perfect, but because you are present. And that presence, wounded, rising, rooted, is the new soil from which all sacred things will grow. The garden is alive, not behind you, but within you. And every breath you take in remembrance waters its roots. Beneath the vilified imagery, the serpent was never just a creature, it was a bridge, a sacred thread connecting heaven to earth, spirit to matter, light to shadow. Its form, winding and cyclical, mimicked the spiral nature of time, the double helix of DNA, the serpentine movement of energy through the spine. It existed between seen and unseen, between knowing and becoming. That's why it terrified the gatekeepers of fixed truths, because it defied polarity. It refused to be only one thing, and in doing so, it revealed everything. The serpent was not merely a symbol of temptation. It was the threshold embodied, the whisper that said, "There is more. Come and see." In ancient mystery traditions, the serpent was a teacher, not of doctrine, but of energy. It rose as kundalini, uncoiling through the body to awaken dormant potential. It guarded the temples of Egypt, curled atop the crowns of pharaohs as uraeus. It slithered through Mayan cosmology as the feathered serpent, both grounded and ascending. In Norse myth, it wrapped the world in its coils, holding reality itself together. Even in alchemy, it consumed its own tail as the Ouroboros, representing eternity, rebirth, and the unity of all opposites. The serpent is not one story, it is the connective tissue of all stories. The reminder that divinity does not live only in the sky or the temple, but in the body, the breath, the bone. To embrace the serpent is to enter the in-between, the liminal, the space where transformation happens. It is not a path for the faint of heart. The serpent demands shedding, of lies, of labels, of lives that no longer serve. It invites you to move through cycles, to die and be reborn again and again, each time more whole, more free. It does not offer safety, it offers initiation, not into belief, but into embodiment. Those who follow it learn to listen with their skin, to see in symbols, to move in rhythm with the unseen. They do not worship the serpent. They become it. Fluid, fierce, uncontainable. The reason the serpent was demonized is simple. It offered liberation outside the approved channels. It brought knowledge not from altars, but from within. It moved past the priests, past the books, and straight into the soul. And nothing is more dangerous to systems of control than a being who knows they are divine without permission. The serpent gave Eve more than fruit. It gave her access to the portal of her own becoming. And in doing so, it gave us all the map, not linear but spiraled, not upward but inward, the map back to ourselves. Now the serpent calls again, through synchronicities, through the ache to shed what no longer fits, through the pulse in your spine when you hear a truth too deep for language. It asks you to remember, not who you were told to be, but who you've always been beneath the forgetting. The serpent's true form is not monstrous, it is majestic. It does not separate, it integrates. And in this time of unraveling and reweaving, it returns not as threat, but as guide. Follow it not with fear, but with reverence. It is not here to lead you astray. It is here to bring you home, through the fire, through the body, through the spiral that never ends. Eve's choice has long been painted as betrayal, a fracture in divine order, a fall from grace. But strip away the fear-laced interpretation, and what you'll find is not sin, but sovereignty. Eve was not a weak-willed woman seduced by lies. She was a soul moved by intuition, stirred by the ancient pulse of truth, compelled to remember. The fruit did not trick her, it resonated. The serpent did not deceive her, it awakened her. And in that fateful act, she became the first spiritual rebel, not for destruction, but for restoration. Not to defy the divine, but to embody it. She chose not ignorance, but insight, not compliance, but consciousness. In choosing the fruit, Eve broke no divine law. She broke the illusion that divine law could only be handed down from outside. Her rebellion was holy. It was the sacred act of one who trusted the voice within more than the command from without. In her courage to see beyond the prescribed, she lit a path for all those who would come after, those who would seek, question, hunger, awaken. The world called her disobedient, but the soul knows better. The soul remembers Eve not with blame, but with reverence. She was the prototype of the seeker, the first to step off the well-paved path into the wilderness of her own knowing. This is why she had to be rewritten, why her name became synonymous with shame. Because a woman who listens to her own voice is a threat to every system that survives on silence. Her myth was distorted to warn others. Do not reach, do not question, do not trust yourself. But the distortion failed. Eve's spirit is too alive, too woven into the roots of the awakening soul. Her flame cannot be snuffed out by centuries of slander. It burns in every woman who chooses herself, in every man who steps into sacred balance, in every being who values truth over tradition. Eve's rebellion is not about gender, it's about essence. It's about the divine feminine's refusal to remain dormant, unseen, silenced. Her story echoes in every mystic who chooses gnosis over dogma, every healer who touches wounds instead of hiding them, every artist who creates from soul rather than approval. Eve is the archetype of the one who dares, the one who risks everything to taste the real, the one who knows that the exile of the body is the return of the spirit. She is not just the mother of flesh, she is the mother of fire, and her children are those who remember. So do not shrink from her legacy. Rise in it. Feel her flame in your own spine. Hear her whisper in the questions you're afraid to ask. Let her rebellion become your rebirth, not through destruction, but through devotion to what is real, what is raw, what is divine within you. Eve was not cast out. She walked out, eyes wide, heart full, feet steady. And with every step, she planted the seeds of awakening. The serpent guided her. The fruit transformed her. But the choice was hers alone. And in that sacred choice, she became not the origin of sin, but the origin of sovereign spiritual becoming. When Adam and Eve crossed the threshold, they did not fall into chaos. They entered a new temple. Earth was no longer just ground beneath their feet. It became the living altar of embodiment. Every leaf, a scripture. Every wound, a sacrament. Every sensation, a teaching. The exile was not away from the divine, but deeper into it, into matter, into form, into time. What had once been ethereal became tactile. What had once been whispered became sung in blood and breath. The body was now the vessel. And earth, with its aching beauty and sacred pain, became the place where God would be remembered, not through commandment, but through experience. The temple of earth does not have walls. Its pillars are mountains, its ceiling, the sky. Its hymns are the cries of birth, the moans of grief, the laughter of lovers, the still silence between words. It offers no orthodoxy, but instead demands presence. It is here that the soul begins the true work, not of worship, but of weaving the divine into every fiber of life. The exile was never banishment, it was invitation. The garden was a classroom. Earth is the apprenticeship. It asks for skin in the game. It asks for the sacred to be carried not in books, but in the heartbeat. To learn not from angels, but from wind, fire, decay, and renewal. This is why incarnation matters. The soul cannot stay forever in the realm of light without losing the fullness of itself. It must descend, must taste and touch and bleed and break, because only through the full embrace of matter does the soul integrate its wisdom. Heaven is potential, earth is embodiment. The garden was the echo of divine order, but earth is the forge of divine expression. The serpent opened the gate, but earth is the altar where the awakened self is offered, not in sacrifice but in realization. You are not here to escape the world. You are here to sanctify it with your presence. This shift from Eden to earth is the essence of the mystical path. It's why the initiate must always be born into limitation, into form, into story. For only by living the illusion can the truth be fully remembered. Only by walking blind can the eyes be opened from within. And when they open, truly open, the sacredness of earth is revealed, not as a place to conquer or flee, but as a lover to be known. Its cycles, your teacher, its darkness, your mirror, its beauty, your reflection. The temple of earth demands reverence, not from above, but from below. It invites not control, but communion. So walk it with bare feet. Let the soil stain your skin and the stars mark your gaze. Let your life become the ritual, your breath, the offering, your presence, the prayer. You are no longer outside the sacred. You are immersed in it. And the exile was never exile at all. It was the beginning of incarnation, of carrying the divine not as a memory, but as marrow. The temple of earth is not far. It is here. And you, yes, you are both its priest and its flame. The garden taught you simplicity. The serpent sparked your knowing. But earth will teach you embodiment, and in its embrace you will remember not just who you were, but why you came. The exile did not create separation. It only revealed the illusion that separation was ever real. In truth, the divine was never far. It was not left behind in the garden, nor hidden in some celestial realm beyond reach. It was, and always has been, within. But in the garden, the divine was untested, unchosen, inherited like breath with no awareness of lungs. It slept quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the spark that only contrast could ignite. When Eve tasted the fruit, it was not God she lost, but the illusion that God could be contained outside of her. In exile, the divine did not abandon. It awakened, through fire, through grief, through becoming. This is the central paradox of spiritual awakening. What you seek is already what you are. The divine is not a voice that commands, it is the presence that remains when all voices fall silent. It speaks not in lightning bolts or sacred texts, but in intuition, in resonance, in the deep knowing that rises from within like a memory too old for language. The exile stripped away the noise so the soul could hear it. And though the journey seemed to lead away from God, every step forward was a step inward. The divine was never in Eden's order. It was buried in the chaos of the self, yet to be remembered. To awaken is not to ascend. It is to descend into the body, the wound, the dirt, the dark, to feel the rawness of life and find that even here, in the ache and the hunger and the silence, the divine hums. It is not separate, it never was, but it needed you to forget so that you could remember freely. Not as a servant, but as a sovereign flame. You were not expelled from paradise, you were initiated into incarnation, and within that descent, the sleeping God within you began to stir, not above, not beyond, but in your marrow, your gaze, your trembling, human hands. All mystics speak of this turning point, the moment when the search outward collapses and the path bends inward. When prayer becomes presence, when scripture becomes silence, when divinity becomes a lived, breathing force that weaves through each moment, not as myth, but as marrow. The garden said, "Look there." The serpent said, "Look here." And in the exile, that here became sacred, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. The veil that once hid God was your own skin, and now with every step it thins. So stop searching the sky. Stop waiting for the voice to boom from the heavens. It is already whispering in your longing, already pulsing in your pain, already rising through your remembrance. The divine was never a destination. It is the depth beneath each breath, the fire between your ribs, the stillness inside the storm. It is not waiting to find you. It is waiting for you to turn inward, to peel back the layers, to light the spark. You were not left, you were lit. And now the flame is yours to tend. The soul does not move in straight lines. It spirals, it circles around the same lessons with deeper awareness each time. It descends before it rises. It repeats, not because it is lost, but because each revolution brings new depth. The serpent knew this. Its movement has always been coiling, cyclical, sacred. While the world seeks linear ascent, step-by-step salvation from sin to sanctity, the serpent teaches something older, the spiral path of becoming. No beginning, no end, just infinite return, to self, to shadow, to source. The fruit was never meant to catapult Eve forward. It was meant to bring her inward, into the spiral of awakening that every soul must travel alone. The myth of progress is seductive. It promises clarity, control, certainty. But the soul is not a staircase, it is a labyrinth. The serpent winds through it not to confuse, but to initiate. Each twist in the spiral is an invitation to re-examine, to refeel, to re-embody. Not because you failed, but because you are ready to see more, feel more, integrate more. The serpent does not rush, it teaches patience, repetition with reverence. It knows that true transformation is not a single leap, but 1,000 tiny deaths and rebirths. Again and again, the spiral pulls you closer, not to perfection, but to presence. This is why the serpent has been both feared and revered. It mocks the rigidity of linear salvation. It laughs at doctrines that promise arrival. It knows there is no final point, only deeper intimacy with the divine. And that intimacy requires movement, shedding skin after skin, identity after identity. The spiral burns through the ego's need for neatness. It reveals the mess as holy, the detour as divine, the relapse as part of the rhythm. There are no wrong turns in the spiral, only new layers, and those who dare to descend will eventually rise, not above, but deeper into the truth of who they are. The spiral also honors timing. It knows that each soul unwinds at its own pace. There is no rush, no universal clock ticking toward enlightenment. Only the gentle coiling inward until the center is met. And at the center, stillness, clarity, the realization that all along you were circling the sacred within, not as punishment, but as process. The serpent guides this journey not with force, but with presence. It is the rhythm keeper of your return. It wraps around the spine, the breath, the memory of what you are beyond belief. It is the living map of embodiment, drawn not with steps, but with spirals. So release the pressure to arrive, to ascend in a straight shot. You are not climbing. You are coiling, shedding, returning. The spiral will take you through old wounds again and again, not because you are broken, but because each pass brings new light. Trust that. Trust the spiral. Trust the serpent's wisdom woven through your very DNA. It does not lead you astray. It leads you home, not once, but endlessly. Through the spiral path, the serpent invites you to remember, awakening is not a race, it is a rhythm, and you, beloved, are right on time. The myth often places Adam as the passive participant, the one who followed, who reacted, who awoke only after Eve's choice. But in the deeper layers, Adam's awakening was not lesser. It was different, not secondary but complementary. Eve opened the portal through inner knowing, through intuitive fire, through bold reception of wisdom. Adam followed not in weakness but in readiness. He embodied the masculine counterpart to Eve's inner ignition. Her act was the spark. His was the grounding. Together they formed the sacred polarity needed to birth a new level of consciousness. The divine did not fracture in that moment. It became fuller. Through Eve's descent into knowing and Adam's step into integration, the human soul was born whole. Adam's choice was conscious. He saw what had shifted in her, the clarity in her eyes, the fire behind her voice, and recognized it as truth. Not the kind decreed from on high, but the kind that pulses in the blood. He did not take the fruit to please her. He took it because he, too, remembered. Her act initiated the cycle, but his confirmed it. In many traditions, the sacred masculine awakens through reflection of the feminine's light, not as dependence, but as mirror, as the one who then brings structure to the revelation. Eve cracked the sky. Adam brought the lightning to the ground, and together they became the first union of awakened form and flame. This unity is often split in false narratives, masculine as dominant, feminine as seduced. But in truth, both were divine agents of transformation. Adam carried the seed of consciousness that could walk the world. While Eve moved first, he made the choice to join, not to control, but to co-create. His awakening was not loud, but it was vital. Through him, the fire entered the masculine current of humanity. He bore the burden of shaping new life from ashes, of walking the earth with hands that remembered how to build what the garden never required. The myth may silence him, but the soul remembers. Adam was not the shadow of Eve. He was her echo in motion. This balanced awakening echoes in every sacred union, in lovers who mirror each other's truth, in friendships where growth is sparked by one and embodied by the other. The dance of awakening is never linear, never singular. It moves through polarity, through give and receive, lead and respond. Eve awakened the light. Adam made it move. He grounded it into the world where it could take root. In doing so, he too left behind the illusion of divine hierarchy. He stepped not behind her, but beside her, into exile, into embodiment, into the world they would now shape together. So honor both flames, the initiator and the integrator, the one who feels first and the one who grounds it in action. Adam's story is not one of weakness, but of willingness. Willingness to change, to walk the path, to awaken even when it hurts. His role was not to resist the feminine fire, but to walk with it into the unknown. This is sacred masculinity, not rigid but receptive, not dominating but devoted. And in every soul, Adam and Eve still dance, the intuitive spark and the conscious step, the fire and the form. And when both are honored, awakening becomes whole, complete, holy. The story calls it a fall, as though something divine was lost. But the mystic knows otherwise. The fall was not descent into depravity, it was the sacred plunge into humanity, into form, into breath, into blood. Until that moment, Adam and Eve were suspended in a dream of perfection, unblemished but unknowing, present but not aware. The fruit shattered the mirror of illusion and gave birth to the one thing the garden could not offer, self-conscious divinity. That paradox, God in a fragile body, spirit in flesh, was not a curse. It was the invitation for heaven and earth to meet in the living temple of the human being. The fall did not end the divine story. It gave it form, it gave it context, it gave it voice. To fall is to descend into limitation. And in that descent, the soul discovers something impossible to learn in the pristine air of Eden: compassion, empathy, resilience. These things are not taught by perfection. They are forged in contrast. Only in forgetting can the sweetness of remembrance be fully known. Only in separation can love be chosen instead of inherited. The sacred human was born not in the garden, but in the dust beyond it. A being of dual nature, animal and angel, instinct and insight, desire and devotion. And this is not a flaw. It is the divine experiment. Not a mistake to be corrected, but a mystery to be lived. Every wrinkle, every scar, every ache and tremble and breath is the scripture of the sacred human. You are not here to transcend your humanity. You are here to sanctify it. Not to float above life, but to sink fully into it and find the divine in dirt, in dance, in discomfort. The garden told the story of unity. The exile began the story of embodiment. And embodiment is not exile, it is expression. The soul expressing itself through taste, through touch, through sorrow and song and sex and silence. The sacred human is not the sinner, it is the synthesis, the sacred third between spirit and matter, the bridge, the portal, the proof. To walk this path is not to strive for flawlessness, but to find grace in the mess, to bring reverence to the mundane, to light candles not only in temples, but in kitchens, in bedrooms, in the corners of your weary heart. You are not a broken echo of a divine image. You are the divine image remembering itself in motion, in mistake, in miracle. This is why the serpent came, not to steal paradise, but to unlock potential. The potential of a God who could feel, bleed, love, lose, rise, and rise again. Not despite the body, but through it. So let the word fall away. Let it be replaced by birth. You were not cast down. You were brought through, delivered into the sacred storm of being. And every time you embrace your humanness without shame, every time you cry and laugh and choose presence over perfection, you honor that birth. You awaken the sacred human within, and in that awakening you do not return to Eden. You bring Eden with you, written not on leaves, but in the language of your living. In your becoming, the garden rises again. This time, not as myth, but as flesh and breath and fire. After the fruit, their eyes opened, and the first thing they saw was their own bodies. Naked, exposed, vulnerable, But the shame they felt did not rise from within. It was introduced, imposed, inherited. The body, once the unspoken vessel of the divine, became a site of fear, a thing to cover, to hide, to mistrust. Thus began the great split, the lie that the sacred could not dwell in skin. That flesh was dirty. That desire was dangerous. But in truth, the body had always been holy. It still is. It carries not sin, but sensation. Not guilt, but guidance. The shame was not revelation. It was distortion. A veil pulled over the temple, convincing the soul that it was separate from the sacred. The serpent never shamed them. It invited them to see, to feel, to awaken to their embodied divinity. But after the awakening came the voice that said, "Hide." That voice still echoes in the world today, in dogmas that fear the body, in systems that profit from disconnection, in cultures that confuse purity with repression. But the body has not forgotten. It still pulses with truth. It still speaks in sensation, in chills, in aches, in pleasure, in pain. It remembers the garden, not as a place, but as a state of presence, and it waits for you to return, not by transcending but by descending, into the breath, the belly, the bones. To reclaim the body is to reclaim the divine, to touch your own skin with reverence, to listen to its signals, to let it be the altar and the oracle. The sacred feminine lives in the curve of hips, in the drumbeat of the womb, in the pulse that rises when truth is near. The sacred masculine lives in the grounded spine, in the protective arms, in the fire that moves toward purpose. Both dwell in the body, not in abstraction, but in rhythm, in movement, in the living, trembling now. The body does not separate you from God. It reveals God. It is the final veil, the last illusion, that holiness must come from beyond instead of within. The shame was manufactured to control, to sever you from your own knowing. A body shamed is a soul silenced. But when you reclaim it, you reclaim your voice, your power, your presence. You begin to feel again, to trust again, to come home not to the garden, but to yourself. And in doing so, you dismantle centuries of lies with a single breath of awareness. The divine lives here, in this skin, this heartbeat, this aching, glorious form. And when you see that, truly see it, the shame evaporates like mist in morning light. So strip it away, not just the clothing, but the conditioning. Let your body be sacred again. Let your walk be worship. Let your tears be baptism. Let your pleasure be prayer. You are not fallen, you are flowering, and the garden is not behind you. It blooms every time you inhabit your body without fear, every time you listen to its wisdom instead of its critics, every time you honor the holiness that lives in every cell. The shame was the lie, the body is the truth, and the serpent came not to tempt, but to remind you, you were never anything less than divine in form. After the exile, the myth says the tree of life was guarded, veiled, unreachable. But in truth, it was never taken. It was never lost. It was never locked behind divine gates. The tree of life still stands, not in some distant celestial realm, but within. It grows in the spine, in the breath, in the silent center of the heart. It is not a relic. It is a rhythm, a living frequency woven into the architecture of your being. The serpent knew this. The mystics remembered. The tree of life is not forbidden. It is concealed by perception, accessible only to those who look not with eyes, but with presence. This tree is no ordinary tree. Its roots reach into the underworld of your unconscious. Its trunk is the steady strength of your will. Its branches stretch toward the divine, reaching across lifetimes and dimensions. And its fruit? Illumination, integration, immortality, not of the body, but of the soul's knowing. Every spiritual path whispers of it. The Kabbalists mapped it. The yogis climbed it through chakras. The alchemists sought it in the union of opposites. The tree of life is the spine of the cosmos, mirrored in the human form. It is not mythology. It is the blueprint of becoming. But to see it, you must look differently. You must turn inward. The tree of life appears when duality dissolves, when good and evil no longer war within you, but dance in balance, when you cease to seek salvation and begin to embody it. This tree does not offer fruit to the obedient. It offers its truth to the embodied. It feeds those who have walked through fire, through forgetting, through the spiral of becoming. And when you are ready, it does not give you escape. It gives you remembrance, not of heaven beyond, but of heaven within, the sacred encoded in your own cells. The illusion of separation veils the tree from the world. But it never leaves. It pulses quietly beneath the noise, beneath the conditioning, waiting for you to still enough to feel it. You do not climb it with effort. You rise through surrender. You align with it through presence. Each breath can become a rung, each act of love, a leaf, each insight, a bloom. The tree of life is not guarded by angels anymore. It is guarded by your own illusions. And once those fall away, the garden reappears, not outside you, but through you. So stop searching the skies for sacred trees. They are already rooted in your being. You are the garden now. The serpent coils at your spine. The fruit ripens in your awareness. The tree of life waits patiently, not for worthiness, but for willingness. Willingness to feel, to fall, to rise, to remember. This is not mythology. This is anatomy. The tree has always been here. Its roots were never severed, only hidden. And now, as you awaken, it becomes visible once more. The divine is not behind you. It is blooming in you. The tree lives, and it bears fruit for all who dare to see with inner sight. The Garden of Eden was not a final destination. It was a threshold, a sacred vestibule, the entryway to the labyrinth of human experience. It was never meant to contain the full spectrum of divine revelation. It was merely the first glimpse, the first touch of eternity wrapped in simplicity. The stillness before the storm of becoming. The garden was the initiation chamber where innocence met potential, where beings were formed but not yet forged. The exile was not a fall from completion, but a push into the furnace of transformation. Just as the seed must leave the pod, just as the child must leave the womb, so must the soul leave Eden to awaken its true power. To see the garden as the pinnacle is to misunderstand the architecture of spiritual evolution. The garden is the 0 point, the blank page, the breath before the first note of a song. It offers no depth, only purity. No scars, only surface. It is the starting ground, not the summit. The divine did not abandon its creation. It sent it into motion, into the sacred spiral of learning, unlearning, embodying. The garden was silence. But earth is the symphony, and the sacred human is not just a creature who remembers Eden. It is the one who rewrites it in the language of flesh, failure, and fire. Initiation always involves a rupture, a moment of disorientation, of leaving what is known and entering the wild. Adam and Eve did not sin, they stepped into initiation. They crossed the veil between static perfection and dynamic reality, between theory and embodiment, between divinity and choice. The garden gave them the form, but exile gave them the mirror, the test, the terrain. It was not a punishment, it was the next layer of the journey. The divine trusts those it initiates. It allowed them to walk away so that they might return, not to the same place, but to the same presence, now carried in their own breath. Every soul echoes this story. The early days of clarity, the rupture, the loss, the wandering, and then the long, slow return. Not to what was, but to what has become possible through the path. The garden lives in your origin, yes, but the true revelation lives in your becoming. The moments when you choose presence in chaos, when you trust your fire even in exile, when you build altars out of ashes. That is where the divine becomes real, not through innocence, but through integration. The garden was a vision, but you are the vessel. So honor the garden, not as your home, but as your launching point. Honor the serpent, not as tempter, but as teacher. Honor the exile, not as exile, but as expansion. You were never meant to stay in Eden. You were meant to carry it with you, seed by seed, breath by breath, memory by memory. The garden was the beginning, but you are the continuation. You are the revelation. And the divine now moves, not in untouched spaces, but in awakened souls willing to walk the spiral, to feel every step, and to rise again and again into the sacred truth of their becoming. The serpent never left. It simply receded, coiled beneath the surface of consciousness, waiting. Not as punishment, but as prophecy. Every few generations, when the world forgets, when the sacred is buried under systems and silence, the serpent stirs. It moves through dreams, symbols, synchronicities. It rises in those who feel too deeply, question too much, burn too brightly. It does not roar, it whispers. It doesn't demand obedience, it invites initiation. The serpent's return is not an external event. It is an inner quickening, a pulse in the soul that says, now, it's time. And when it comes, everything begins to unravel, not to destroy, but to awaken. This is the cycle of spiritual remembering. It is not new. It has turned through ages, Atlantis, Egypt, Vedic India, the mystery schools of Greece, the mystics of Sufism, Kabbalah, Gnosticism. Each time the world grows rigid, mechanical, forgetful, the serpent returns. It coils around systems built on fear and cracks them open from the inside. It doesn't fight. It deconstructs by vibration, by activating those who cannot fit the mold. The serpent speaks through the artists, the rebels, the healers, the sacred disruptors, those who carry Eden in their marrow and exile in their eyes, those who remember that the fruit was freedom, not failure. You can feel it now, in the collapse of institutions, in the rising hunger for meaning, in the aching truth that what once worked no longer does. This is the serpent's doing, not to punish, but to purify, not to shame, but to shift. It winds through the spine of the collective, awakening ancient memory. You are not separate. You are not broken. You are not here to obey a dying system. You are here to become the new Eden, not as utopia but as embodiment, not through escape, but through integration. The serpent brings medicine, but it burns on the way down. It shows you your masks, your cages, your comfort disguised as chains. But do not fear its bite. Fear the silence of a soul that never awakens. The serpent's poison is the antidote to amnesia. It strips away everything you are not until only truth remains. It is sacred discomfort. It is the force that says, you are more than what they told you, you are more than what you settled for. It doesn't fix you, it forges you. And in that forging, you begin to carry the frequency of the garden, not as memory but as embodiment. You become the fruit, the tree, the fire, the flame. You become the gate through which others will walk. So when the serpent rises, and it is rising, do not recoil. Breathe. Listen. Surrender. Let it move through you. Let it uncoil what was bound. Let it remind you why you came. Not to conform, but to catalyze. Not to be good, but to be real. The serpent's return is not apocalypse. It is ascension through descent. Not away from earth, but into it. Into the body, into the shadow, into the spiral path home. And when you walk it, fully awake, fully embodied, you will see The serpent was never your enemy. It was your elder, your mirror, your guide, and it has returned for you. It was never about going back, not to Eden, not to innocence, not to the illusion of perfection. The entire myth has pointed to this. You are the garden now. Not a garden of untouched bliss, but of sacred becoming, of rooted wisdom, of holy paradox. You carry in your breath the memory of what was, and in your blood the blueprint of what is to come. You are the soil and the seed, the serpent and the fruit, the exile and the return, not as opposites, but as one unified rhythm pulsing through your being. The story never ended in banishment. It ends in embodiment. It ends in you. The garden is no longer a place. It is a presence. It moves through your gaze when you see through illusion. It speaks in your voice when you choose truth over comfort. It flowers in your heart every time you love without armor. You were never meant to search for it. You were meant to become it. To remember that the divine doesn't dwell in distant heavens, but in your fingertips, your laughter, your longing. You are not a guest of the sacred. You are its living form. The garden grows where you stand, when you choose to feel, to forgive, to see with the eyes of the soul. The serpent still speaks, but now it speaks from within you. It does not offer forbidden fruit. It offers remembrance, that you are not waiting to be saved. You are remembering that you already are, not by doctrine, not by dogma, but by daring to be fully human and fully divine in the same breath. You are the bridge now, between earth and sky, between shadow and light, between what was and what can be. The garden was never behind you. It was becoming you. Every wound you've carried, every truth you've spoken, every illusion you've shattered. These were not detours. They were seeds. And now you bloom, not in the way the world expected, but in the way only your soul could design, with roots in ancient soil and blossoms shaped by fire. You bloom because you remember. The exile was the path, the serpent was the guide, the fall was the flight, and the garden was not lost. It was waiting for you to awaken, to return. Not to the myth, but to the marrow, not to the gate, but to the truth within your chest. You are the Eden you seek. You are the tree, the flame, the breath of divine remembrance taking form. So walk now with sacred feet. Speak with a voice that knows its origin. Touch the world like it is holy. Because it is. Because you are. The story is not over. It begins anew each moment you choose presence over programming, love over fear, truth over silence. You are the living garden. The serpent moves through your spine. The divine speaks through your becoming. You are not the fallen. You are the flowering. The myth ends here, and you begin, whole, awake, eternal, and finally, fully home.